This is podcast 1 about Chapter 8, which is on teaching strategies and teaching styles that are made by Mostyn. Teaching styles are a set of decisions made in conjunction with the teaching act, as defined by Mostyn and Ashworth. Teaching functions are usually performed within an instructional framework, a delivery system for getting the content to the learner. This instructional framework is called a teaching strategy or approach to teaching, and in group instruction it organizes both student and teacher roles. Each teaching strategy assigns different roles to the learner and to the teacher for one or more teaching functions. Teachers select an instructional strategy based on the nature of the content, the objectives of the teacher, and the characteristics of the learner. In our lesson plans, there is a place for teaching strategies to be listed and described. The reason I ask you to describe them is because I want you to tell me what the nature of the content is and the reason that you picked that particular teaching style for that content. A teaching strategy is an instructional framework for teaching groups of students. A style is the manner of the delivery of the teacher. The goal of giving you all of these teaching strategies and styles is to give you a broad spectrum or range of different strategies to use with different contents. The selection of the strategy or teaching style is certainly dependent upon the content and the teacher's preference. It also reflects a teacher's philosophy. Sometimes you might not be as successful as a teacher for station teaching as you are for peer teaching or vice versa. So that will affect which teaching style or strategy you use, is how successful you've been with it in the past. It's a combination of the content, the format, and the degree of student decision making that goes into the strategy. On your lesson plan, as I just mentioned, you need to describe how you use that teaching strategy in the lesson and with what content. Most teachers use multiple styles or strategies within one lesson. It's not just command style or lecture or interactive that you use. It's usually several different types or parts of a teaching strategy. Good teachers use both indirect and direct styles, often in the same lesson or within the same lesson. The style chosen depends on the level of self-direction the students have developed, and otherwise you are limited in the styles that you can use. Direct instruction, of course, means that the teacher has most control over the selection of the content, the decision making, and so on. It is usually task-oriented, but sometimes a relaxed environment with clear academic goals. Clear instructional goals and high teacher monitoring is a description of direct instruction. They also provide structured learning activities, again, sponsored by and developed by the teacher mostly. There is immediate academic oriented feedback. The advantage of direct instruction is in its efficiency. You get across a lot of content in a small amount of time. Indirect instruction does take more time, but it has some also very good goals that go along with it. Teaching directly usually looks like this in these bullets. You break down the skills into manageable parts. You clearly describe and demonstrate exactly what the learner is to do. You design structured tasks for students to practice what is to be learned. You hold students accountable for the tasks that are prescribed, and you evaluate students and their own teaching in terms of what students have learned. Competency with motor skills usually means that you need to teach more effectively with direct learning teaching styles or teaching strategies. And we do a lot of teaching about competency and motor skills. Indirect instruction is categorized by the teacher control of the learning process, but it becomes shared with the students. The content is presented more holistically than in a broken down manner. Students' thinking, feeling, or interaction skills are built into the learning experiences. The individual nature of student abilities, interests, and needs receives more consideration. and the advantage is that students retain more information if they are responsible for their own learning. The NASB content standards are specifically designed and written to identify outcomes that are usually taught with more indirect styles. There is a purpose in that. We're trying to get teachers to let students have more control over their own learning. So the way teaching looks when it's taught indirectly means that you design tasks that involve the student at a higher level of cognitive processing when they have to be responsible for their own learning. Select large, meaningful chunks of content that they can remember and apply to the bigger picture of the skills. Involve the learner in the process of learning and try to develop in your students independent learning skills. Teaching strategies as delivery systems or approaches to teaching organize instruction so that teaching functions are performed in different ways. For instance, the selection of content. Who selects the content? Are all the students taught the same thing at the same time, or are you going to differentiate learning? The communication of tasks, are they being communicated by the teacher, or are they being communicated by peers or students in general, or by themselves? The progression of content, usually the teacher is responsible for that even in indirect styles, but sometimes the students can decide on the progression. And then the provision of feedback and evaluation, is that done by the students or is it done by the teacher? When a teaching strategy also identifies the content to be taught, it is often called a teaching model. For instance, sport education is a teaching model or a curriculum model in physical education. The tactical games approach is also a teaching model in which you try to teach categories of games at the same time that have the same objective or similar skills within the games, such as net wall games or invasion games or whatever. I'd like to go back here to the progression of content. There is an intertask development where the progression is from one skill to another. In other words, in tennis, going from the forehand stroke to then teaching the backhand stroke, that are very much related, but the backhand's a little bit more difficult to do. So that's a progression between skills. But intra-task means that the progression is within the skill that you're teaching already. For instance, when you're teaching a forehand in tennis, you might start from a toss and then progress that's close to the net or the service line, and then move back about 3 steps as they progress to a better ability to hit the ball. And you could also have a ball from a feeder hitting it off of a tennis racket instead of just a toss. So that is progression within learning one skill. Muska Mostyn in 1966 made a monumental contribution to the methodology of physical education and to other subject areas who use his range or spectrum of teaching styles. They go from command to discovery, and he has captured many of the different styles that teachers use in a class. We put this under teaching strategies because they are similar, not the same thing, but are similar. Teaching style is a composite of teacher behavior, including the responses to a broad set of teaching and learning decisions, the strategies, the methods, and the patterns of interaction with students in efforts directed at being effective. The importance or the advantages of Mostyn's teaching styles are that students naturally find some topics and activities more interesting and enjoyable to work on than others. So if you use a variety of teaching styles and strategies to reach the students, you will reach every student in your class eventually with different styles. They all have different styles of learning too. Student learning is often not based on the topics presented, but upon the way the topics are presented and the student's prior experiences with those concepts. So the old adage of it's not so much what you say as how you say it makes a difference. That's the end of Podcast 1 for Chapter 8 on teaching strategies.